Once upon a time, in a quiet little town, Peppa Pig and her family discovered something very strange in their garden. "George, come and see this. There's a new muddy puddle in our garden, but it wasn't raining yesterday." Dinosaur points excitedly. The muddy puddle was unlike any they had seen before. It was perfectly round and seemed to shimmer with an odd, dark reflection. "That's very strange, George. Look at my reflection. It doesn't look quite right."
Grrr.
Makes worried dinosaur sounds. "What are you two looking at?" "Oh my, where did this enormous puddle come from? I'm an expert at muddy puddles, and I've never seen one quite like this before. Seems to go very, very deep." Suddenly, the puddle began to make soft bubbling sounds, as if something was moving deep beneath the surface. "Let me try throwing a pebble in it. Maybe we can hear how deep it is." "Where's stone go? That's very peculiar indeed. I heard there was something unusual happening in your garden." "Oh my word, that's quite an extraordinary puddle." Grandpa Pig was very wise and had seen many strange things in his long life, but even he was puzzled by this mysterious puddle. "Look, everyone, the reflection isn't showing our sky. It's showing something completely different. It looks like a beautiful underground cave with sparkling crystals." "Pretty. Dinosaur cave. Peppa, what an amazing discovery. It's like a window to another world. I've never seen anything like this before. It's like magic." The children decided to work together to solve the mystery of the magical muddy puddle. "Look, it's glowing, but it feels warm and friendly, not frightening." To everyone's delight, the puddle was home to tiny, magical creatures who had been living peacefully underground. Flying friends, nice dinosaurs. They're so cute and friendly. Makes musical tinkling sounds. We've been waiting so long for kind friends to find our portal. The little fairy creatures had accidentally created the puddle portal while trying to return home to their crystal caves. Let's all sing together. Maybe our friendship and happiness can help them get home. Singing, "We are friends. We help each other through the sunshine and the rain. Thank you, kind friends. You will always be welcome in our crystal kingdom." The magical portal closed gently, leaving behind only happy memories and a perfectly ordinary muddy puddle. Well, that was quite an adventure, and now we have the best muddy puddle for jumping. I love happy endings, and I love muddy puddles. And so, Peppa and her friends learned that sometimes the most mysterious things can lead to the most wonderful friendships. The end. It was a foggy evening in Peppa's neighborhood. The playground looked different today, darker, quieter than usual. Peppa and her friends decided to play one last game before going home. "Let's play hide and seek," squealed Peppa excitedly. But as she looked around, she noticed something strange. The swings were moving by themselves, creaking in the wind. Susie Sheep was the first to hide. She ran behind the big oak tree, but when she looked back, the playground seemed to stretch endlessly into the mist. Pedro Pony galloped toward the slide, but it appeared much taller than before. The steps seemed to go up and up, disappearing into the gray clouds above. Rebecca Rabbit hopped to her hiding spot near the seesaw, but the seesaw was moving up and down on its own, making eerie squeaking sounds that echoed through the empty playground. Peppa began counting 1, 2, 3, but her voice sounded different, deeper and more echoing than usual. The numbers seemed to float in the air around her. When Peppa reached 10, she opened her eyes. The playground had transformed completely. Everything was covered in thick, swirling fog, and strange shadows danced between the equipment. "Ready or not, here I come," called Peppa. But her friends were nowhere to be seen. Only their faint giggles could be heard, coming from different directions. Peppa walked toward the swings, but they stopped moving the moment she approached. The chains hung perfectly still, as if frozen in time. She heard Susie's voice calling from behind the tree, "Peppa, come find me." But when Peppa looked, she saw multiple shadows of Susie dancing around the trunk. The slide had grown even taller, reaching into the dark sky. Pedro's voice echoed from the top, "Help me, Peppa. I can't get down." But the slide seemed to have no end. Rebecca's laughter came from the seesaw, but it sounded like many rabbits laughing at once. The seesaw moved faster and faster, creating a rhythmic thumping sound. Peppa felt confused and a little scared. This isn't how hide and seek usually works, she thought. The playground equipment seemed to be playing tricks on her. Suddenly, all the sounds stopped. The playground became completely silent. Even the wind had stopped blowing, and the fog hung motionless in the air. "Friends," called Peppa nervously. "Where are you?" Her voice was the only sound in the eerie silence. Even her own footsteps seemed muffled. Then, from all around her, came the sound of giggling. But it wasn't quite right. The giggles were too long, too echoing, and seemed to come from everywhere at once. The playground equipment began to move again, but in impossible ways. The roundabout spun backward, the swing swayed in perfect unison, and the slide grew and shrank. Peppa realized this wasn't a normal game anymore. "I want to go home," she called out. But the playground seemed to stretch in all directions, with no clear way out. Just then, she heard a familiar voice. "Peppa, wake up!" It was Mummy Pig's voice, but it sounded far away, as if coming from another world. The fog began to swirl faster and faster around Peppa. The playground equipment spun and moved in a dizzying dance, creating a whirlwind of colors and sounds. "Wake up, Peppa!" The voice grew louder and clearer. The strange playground began to fade, becoming transparent like a ghost. Peppa blinked her eyes and found herself in her own bed, with Mummy Pig gently shaking her shoulder. "You were having a nightmare, little one," said Mummy Pig softly. "Oh," gasped Peppa, looking around her familiar bedroom. It was all a dream. The playground, the fog, my friends. It was all just a scary dream. Mummy Pig tucked Peppa back into bed. "Sometimes our imagination can play tricks on us," she explained. "But you're safe now, and tomorrow you can play with your real friends." Peppa smiled and closed her eyes. But just before she fell back asleep, she could have sworn she heard the faint sound of playground swings creaking in the distance. In the sunny and joyful world of Peppa Pig, where every day was filled with laughter and new discoveries, evening came. But this evening was unusual. The air was still, and the shadows seemed to grow longer and darker than usual. Something had changed, something that made Peppa feel a slight unease. Peppa and George were playing in the garden when Mummy Pig called them for dinner. George, as always, was inseparable from his beloved Dinosaur. But today, when they hurried into the house, Dinosaur accidentally slipped from his hands and remained lying in the shadow under the old oak tree. No one noticed this. Night fell upon the garden. The moon, full and pale, illuminated the yard, but under the old oak tree remained impenetrable darkness. There, in this darkness, lay the forgotten Dinosaur, and something began to happen. His eyes, usually so kind and round, began to slowly glow with a dim, ominous red light. In the house, Peppa and George were already asleep, but George tossed and turned in bed, feeling inexplicable anxiety. He had strange dreams in which his beloved toy called to him, but the voice was distorted and alien. Peppa also felt something was wrong, but couldn't understand what exactly. Meanwhile, in the garden, Dinosaur began to move. Slowly, unnaturally, he rose on his little paws. His red eyes burned brighter, and a terrible, distorted smile appeared on his plush face. He began to move toward the house, making a quiet, scratching sound that could only be heard in the complete silence of the night. The sound approached the house. It was like claws scratching on wood, but much more sinister. Peppa woke up. She heard this sound, and her heart began to beat faster. She looked at George, who was still sleeping, but his breathing was irregular. The sound stopped at the front door. Then a quiet but distinct creak was heard. It was the door handle. It slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to turn down. Peppa held her breath. Who could be there at such a late hour? The door creaked open. In the doorway stood Dinosaur, but this was not the cute, plush Dinosaur that George knew. His eyes burned with hellish fire, and his smile was wide and full of razor-sharp teeth. He was bigger than Peppa remembered, and his shadow filled the entire corridor. Dinosaur slowly moved forward. His steps were silent, but each one echoed in Peppa's heart. He climbed the stairs, his red eyes directed straight at Peppa and George's room. Peppa hid under the blanket, trembling with fear. Dinosaur entered the room. His shadow fell on George's bed. George woke up. His eyes widened in horror when he saw his beloved toy standing over him, distorted and sinister. He let out a piercing scream that echoed throughout the house. George's scream woke up Daddy Pig and Mummy Pig. They rushed into the children's room, turning on the light. Dinosaur, as if by magic, returned to his usual appearance, falling to the floor next to the bed. The red eyes disappeared, scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. One sunny afternoon, Peppa and George were enjoying a peaceful picnic in the park, surrounded by vibrant green grass and cheerful flowers. The day seemed perfect, with birds chirping melodiously in the trees above. Suddenly, without warning, a strange, shimmering portal opened beneath a large oak tree, crackling with otherworldly energy. Curiosity overcame their caution, and Peppa and George peered into the swirling vortex, mesmerized by its hypnotic patterns. It hummed with unsettling energy, pulling them closer with an irresistible force. They tumbled through the portal, feeling weightless as they fell through dimensions, landing with a soft thud in a distorted version of their world. The sky was a sickly green, casting an eerie glow over everything, while the trees were skeletal and leafless, their bare branches reaching like grasping claws. The familiar sounds of the park were replaced by a low, guttural hum that seemed to come from the ground itself. Their house stood in the distance, but it was twisted and decaying, its walls cracked and crumbling, its windows like vacant, staring eyes. They cautiously approached, their footsteps echoing unnaturally on the cracked pavement, calling for Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig, but only silence answered their cries. As they stepped inside through the creaking front door, the air grew heavy and oppressive, filled with a metallic scent that made them nauseous. The furniture was warped and distorted, as if melted by unseen heat, and shadows danced menacingly in every corner, moving independently of any light source. A faint, unsettling melody drifted from the living room, a twisted version of a lullaby they once knew. They found Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig sitting on the sofa, their backs to them, completely motionless. Their forms were slightly elongated, their skin a pale, unnatural gray that glowed faintly in the dim light. When they slowly turned, their eyes were black, sunken voids that absorbed all light, and their smiles were too wide, too fixed, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. They spoke in perfect unison, their voices a distorted echo of their parents, demanding that Peppa and George join them in this nightmare realm. Peppa and George backed away in horror, realizing these were not their parents, but something sinister wearing their faces. The distorted figures slowly rose from the sofa, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by a cruel puppeteer. Peppa and George ran through the warped house, trying desperately to find an exit, but the walls seemed to shift and close in around them, trapping them in an ever-shrinking maze. They found a door that should have led outside, but instead it opened to an endless, dark corridor filled with whispers and strange echoes. The distorted parents pursued them relentlessly, their laughter echoing through the corridor like breaking glass. Peppa and George were finally cornered at the end of the hallway, the parents closing in with their sharp teeth gleaming and black eyes boring into their souls. The screen slowly faded to black, leaving their fate unknown. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was Peppa's birthday, and the whole family was excited about the special party they had planned. Grandpa Pig had promised to show them something magical in his attic, something he had been saving for a very special occasion. The children could hardly contain their excitement as they climbed the creaky wooden stairs to the dusty old attic above Grandpa's house. The attic was filled with old boxes, forgotten toys, and mysterious objects covered in white sheets. But in the center of the room stood something extraordinary, an antique music box with a beautiful dancing pig figure on top. Grandpa Pig smiled warmly and told them it was a family heirloom that had been passed down for generations. When you wound it up, the little pig would dance, and the most beautiful melody would play. George was the first to notice something strange about the music box. The dancing pig figure looked exactly like Peppa, but its eyes seemed to follow you wherever you moved in the room. When Grandpa wound up the music box, the The melody that played was hauntingly beautiful, but there was something unsettling about it. The tune seemed to echo longer than it should, and the dancing pig moved in ways that didn't quite match the rhythm of the music. As the melody played, Peppa began to feel dizzy. The room started to spin slowly around her, and she noticed that her own movements were beginning to mirror those of the dancing pig in the music box. When the pig raised its arm, Peppa found her arm lifting involuntarily. When it turned its head, she felt compelled to turn hers in the same direction. George watched in growing alarm as his scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a quiet evening when Peppa noticed something strange about her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Instead of her usual smile, the reflection was frowning with darker eyes. When Peppa waved, the reflection moved a second too late, as if thinking about whether to copy her movements. George was playing with his dinosaur when he heard whispers from inside the toy box. The whispers grew louder in an unknown language that made him feel cold. When he opened the box, all his toys were arranged in a perfect circle, facing outward, as if they had been watching him play. Mummy Pig was cooking when she noticed the family portrait had changed. All family members were still smiling, but their eyes had turned completely black, with extra shadows behind them. Every time she looked away and back, the shadows moved closer to the family in the photograph. Daddy Pig was reading when he realized the same news story appeared on every page. The story was about a pig family who disappeared, leaving only empty clothes and a house full of mirrors that reflected nothing at all. As night fell, the family gathered for dinner, but something was wrong. The food kept changing when they weren't looking. Peppa's carrots became tiny orange eyes that blinked. George's potatoes turned into gray stones that whispered his name. The parents' meals transformed into things that looked like food but smelled like forgotten places. The lights flickered, and with each flicker, their shadows moved independently, performing actions none of them were doing. Peppa's shadow pointed behind her, George's shadow covered its eyes, and the parents' shadows reached protectively toward their children. When they tried to leave, every door led back to the same room. The windows showed not their garden, but an endless gray landscape where other pig families walked in mechanical circles, their faces blank and eyes reflecting no light. The telephone rang, but Daddy Pig heard his own voice warning about dangers he didn't understand. The voice told him they were no longer in their real house, but in a place where lost families go when they stay too long in front of mirrors. As night deepened, they realized other versions of themselves moved through the rooms, slightly different versions that walked through walls and spoke in reverse. These other selves tried to communicate something important through incomprehensible whispers and gestures. The final realization came when Peppa looked outside and saw their real selves in the garden, calling for help and trying to get into a house that no longer existed. They understood they had become the reflections, trapped forever in a mirror world where nothing was real, and the only escape was to find someone else to take their place. Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning when Peppa and George woke up in their bedroom. The sun was shining through their window, and everything seemed normal. Mummy Pig called them down for breakfast, her voice echoing through the house in that familiar, cheerful way. But as Peppa walked down the stairs, she noticed something strange. The family portraits on the wall seemed different somehow. The smiles in the pictures looked too wide, too forced, as if they were hiding something terrible behind them. At breakfast, Daddy Pig was reading his newspaper as usual, but when he looked up to greet the children, his eyes appeared completely black for just a moment before returning to normal. Peppa blinked, thinking she must have imagined it. George was playing with his toy dinosaur, making his usual dinosaur noises, but the sounds seemed to echo strangely in the kitchen, as if the room was much larger than it should be. After breakfast, Peppa and George decided to play in the garden. The weather was beautiful, but as they stepped outside, they noticed that all the flowers in the garden had turned black overnight. The grass beneath their feet felt cold and damp, even though it hadn't rained. The swing set creaked ominously in the breeze, moving back and forth even though no one was pushing it. George pointed to the muddy puddles they loved to jump in, but today the water looked darker than usual, almost like thick, black paint. When Peppa looked closer, she could see strange shapes moving beneath the surface. She called for Mummy Pig, but her voice seemed to disappear into the air, as if the garden was swallowing all sound. Suddenly, their friend Susie Sheep appeared at the garden gate. But something was wrong with Susie. Her wool was matted and gray, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. When she smiled, her teeth appeared sharp and pointed, nothing like the friendly Susie they knew. She spoke in a voice that sounded like multiple people talking at once, asking if Peppa and George wanted to play a new game. The game, Susie explained, was called Forever Friends. The rules were simple. Once you started playing, you could never stop. You would play together for all eternity, never growing up, never going home, never seeing your family again. George began to cry, but his tears turned to black drops that stained the ground where they fell. Peppa tried to run back to the house, but the door had vanished. Where the entrance used to be, there was only a solid wall. The windows had disappeared too, leaving the house looking like a giant, featureless box. George's crying grew louder and more desperate, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. More of their friends began to appear in the garden. Pedro Pony, Rebecca Rabbit, and Candy Cat all emerged from behind the trees, but they all looked wrong. Their colors were faded and dull, their movements jerky and unnatural. They surrounded Peppa and George, chanting in unison about the wonderful game they were all going to play together. As the circle of friends closed in, Peppa noticed that the sky above them was changing. The bright blue was slowly turning to deep purple, then to black. Stars began to appear, but they weren't twinkling normally. Instead, they pulsed like heartbeats, growing brighter and dimmer in a rhythm that made Peppa feel dizzy and sick. The last thing Peppa remembered was Susie Sheep's voice, now sounding like a whisper that came from inside her own head, saying that the game was about to begin and that they would all be the best of friends forever and ever, in a place where time stood still and no one ever had to say goodbye.